Hello. Welcome back to the fog. Come, stay a while and listen. I'm Taylor, the casual crypt keeper, and I've got a little something for you. When it comes to paranormal investigations, there are few who can say they've handled even half of the oddities that the legendary demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren have faced. These two Connecticut natives filled case files and a museum full of haunted stories and relics. Let's see what we can conjure up and take a quick look at some of the best of their many cases. This is the top 5 scary Ed and Lorraine Warren cases that went horribly wrong. Let us know down below in the comments if you want to hear more stuff from Ed and Lorraine Warren, or if there's a whole wide world of creeps just waiting for you. Let's dive on in. Number 5, Amityville. It's hard to say outright what the most famous Warren case would be. Annabelle, maybe? The Perron family that would inspire The Conjuring? If we're going solely on the amount of movies made based on one case, then it absolutely has to be the Amityville haunting. Amityville, Long Island was the center stage for one of America's most infamous and strange cases. In 1974, the house had been owned by the DeFeo family, until one day Ronald DeFeo Jr. went one by one with a rifle and ended the life of every member of his family, claiming that spirits and voices from beyond had told him to do it. Not even a year later, the Lutz family would move in, not particularly bothered by the house's dark history. I guess they were getting a great deal. During the first month of living there, they realized almost right away that something was wrong. Swarms of flies appearing everywhere, banging noises, and even seeing spectral apparitions of monstrous animals or phantasmal beings, usual stuff when you move into a fixer-upper. The experts in the paranormal, Ed and Lorraine Warren, were called in to investigate the haunting to see if there was anything they could do. They brought with them camera crews and tried to record their findings, most famously finding a photo of what appeared to be the ghost of a young boy, replete with shimmering eyes staring down from the stairwell. It's actually pretty chilling. Now, it should be addressed that even by skeptic standards, there is a lot of debate as to whether the Amityville horror was closer to the Amityville hoax. George Lutz, the patriarch of the Lutz family, contacted the DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, who said he was trying to get a book written up about the client, and Weber had later told news media that the haunting was all just a grand exaggeration that he had collaboratively made up with the Lutz family over a bottle of wine, in the hopes of getting a retrial and in the hopes of getting a bit of commercial success for the Lutz family. So I ask you, what do you think? Real example of America's most famous haunting, or just a scary story to sell some books and make some movies? And my ghouls and goblins, if you're looking for more terrifying true tales, or maybe true tales, from ghosts to cryptids to aliens and way more, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then like 10,000 videos on top of that. Drop a like, a subscribe if you'd like, and if you want to stay scared, you know where to go. Alright, moving on. Number 4, Enfield. Another very famous chapter from the Warrens' playbook was the Enfield poltergeist. While not quite as legendary as their other cases, it was still compelling enough to serve as the inspiration for the second Conjuring film. Now, this movie took a few liberties here and there, but for the most part was fairly inspired by the real case. So let's take a little look over as to what truly happened in Enfield all those years ago. It was 6 years after the Perron family haunting, all the way up in Enfield, England. The Hodgson family had been living there peacefully, one single mother, Peggy Hodgson, and her 4 children. It was the summer of 1977, when the youngest members of the Hodgson family seemed to be being targeted by some invisible presence. They saw the dresser of their bedroom sliding across the room as if a powerful force was pushing it all around. They would hear constant knocking from all over. The family had called the police, worried that there might have been a burglar, and when officers arrived, they claimed they arrived to a home where the furniture was free floating throughout the air. Over the course of a year, psychics, investigators, amateur and otherwise, all came to the Enfield house in the hopes that they would be the one to be able to crack this case and figure out just what was causing these mysterious occurrences. Of course, among them was Ed and Lorraine Warren. You probably could have guessed that's why I'm talking about it in the video. They were certain that they had on their hands another classic poltergeist scenario. Now, unlike the film, the story actually does differ pretty greatly here. In the real story, the Warrens were not terribly involved with the Enfield haunting at all. In fact, and were barely there for a few days even. There's even some reports that they were there strictly for media attention, saying to another investigator that we can make some real money off this case. Most of the investigators called believed that the case had been a hoax, and largely exaggerated and stretched by people involved. And the Warrens thought they had a pretty good case on their hands. But was that because there was a real spirit? Or is it just because they knew they had a great plot outline for a possible movie sequel in their franchise someday? In 1979, the Enfield haunting kind of just up and stopped abruptly. No more sightings, no more reports, and no one was ever really sure what had happened. Was it ever really there? Number 3, the Perron house. This maybe is the most famous of all the Warrens cases, and definitely one of the most recognizable, as it was the case that inspired the first of the Conjuring smash hit films, and I'll be honest, it's probably why you even know who the Warrens are. I'm certain if you're watching this video or you've been a longtime fan of the channel, you know the ins and the outs of the Perron family haunting probably better than I do, to be honest. But hey, we could all use a little refresher and a little touch-up sometimes. There's nothing wrong with review, so let's get right into it. In 1971, the Perron family moved their 5 daughters into a massive farmhouse in Rhode Island. I think the thing had like 14 bedrooms or something just absurd. It seemed perfect for Carolyn and Roger Perron. They had found their dream home. It was spacious, it was a nice neighborhood, there was room for their kids to play. It would have been a perfect forever home if it wasn't for the fact that malicious spirits had already decided to make it theirs. Shortly after the Perrons moved in, they noticed a series of inexplicable happenings. At first it was pretty benign, you know, some things go missing, objects move unexpectedly, you find a chair in a room you wouldn't expect it to, but then it ramped up rather quickly. The Perrons would claim every morning they would smell the smell of rotten flesh, and they would wake up to discover their beds levitating, and you know what, on some mornings I'd probably sleep right through that too. The family researched the house a little and discovered that it had been owned by a lineage of one family for 8 generations, with many members of the family dying under some pretty mysterious circumstances. They also learned that a woman named Bathsheba had lived there, a possible Satanist and witch, and they believed that she was haunting the home, threatened by Carolyn Perron's energy, seeing her as a threat to her. This is when the Warrens were called in to do a seance, to try and commune with the spirits beyond. One of the Perrons' daughters claims that they saw their mother speak in tongues, possessed by the spirits. Now, in the film, they went a bit Hollywood with it. The Warrens perform an exorcism and Ed Warren saves the day. But the real story wasn't so neatly wrapped up. The Warrens were actually kicked out of this house by Roger Perron, who said that they were just making things worse and they were making his wife's mental health worsen. The Perrons would end up remaining living in that home for the better part of a decade. And you know what? Honestly, if rent was good enough, and if I could get those malevolent spirits to offer to, I don't know, help out with the dishes every now and again, maybe kick in a few bucks for Hydra and the internet, I'd probably be okay with it too. Number 2, the Southend werewolf. Now here is an interesting one for you. This is probably one of the oddest cases in the history of a pair of demonologists who made a career of exclusively investigating the most bizarre cases possible. It takes us back to England once more, this time in Essex. Now, unlike a majority of the Warrens cases, this wasn't a haunted house or a poltergeist, but it was someone claiming that they had been cursed with lycanthropy. A fairly innocuous carpenter, one William Ramsey, had claimed that since boyhood he had been cursed to transform into a werewolf. I am so jealous. It hurts so bad seeing someone live out your dreams. I wanted to be a werewolf more than anybody, and I didn't get it. He claims that it had plagued him his entire life, his first transformation occurring during boyhood. He was playing outside when he felt an icy breeze come over his skin, freezing his sweat in place. He said he then felt this primal bloodlust and hunger come over him and was overwhelmed by a pungent foul odor. He flew into a fit of rage and found himself tearing up a fence post with the fence still attached and gnawing at the wire mesh. You know, just regular stuff that kooky old kids do. For years, he thought it was just a very bizarre chapter in his life, something that came over a boy no one could explain. But in 1983, Will was out with friends when he felt it come over him again. He felt that freezing cold chill on his skin and excused himself to the bathroom. It's here where he claims he saw the face of a wolf staring back at him in the mirror. He called a cab home and claims he started to growl and try to bite his fellow passenger. The driver stopped the car because, you know, I don't want a werewolf in my backseat either, and tried to get the raging man out of the back seat, and after minutes of thrashing, he finally calmed down. The years would keep going and William would do his level best to keep that inner beast in check. But it was in 1989 as his stories made the rounds of the tabloids that caught the attention of Ed and Lorraine, who convinced William to travel to Connecticut to visit them for an exorcism. Initially, William was skeptical, which I find very surprising. You think that you're turning into a werewolf, but an exorcism makes you raise an eyebrow. Anyway, I digress. He ended up visiting, and reports claim that after a long night of violent thrashing, the wolf was exorcised from his soul. And since then, William Ramsey found peace. And number 1, the Smurl house. Bringing us back to a more classic haunting, the Smurl house is one of the more intense hauntings the Warrens took on. In 1974, Janet and Jack Smurl moved into a new house in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. They claim almost as soon as they moved in, they found themselves at odds with an invisible force that was terrorizing their family. They claim something was causing loud noises, horrible odors, and at one point, straight up launched their dog across the living room. Although maybe he might have found that fun. I don't know. I've met some dogs who were into stuff like that. The Smurls lived with this torment, I guess just assuming that dealing with a poltergeist was something every suburban family has to deal with in the 70s. It really seemed like it was a real problem back then. It wasn't until 1986, nearly ensuring a decade of haunting, that the Smurls thought it was time to call in some outside help, specifically from Ed and Lorraine Warren. When they arrived, Ed claimed the demon living inside the Smurls' home was very powerful, that it shook the mirrors and furniture when they arrived. Ed tried to scare it out by playing religious music and prayer. Sadly, this didn't quite work. I think you gotta try something a little heavier, maybe like Slayer, Megadeth, that might scare a demon, or they might find it awesome. Ed claims that he saw a dark mass forming in the home, something more powerful than he was expecting. He claims too he once saw a message appearing on one of the mirrors, warning the pair that they needed to leave. Months went by where the Warrens tried everything they could do to get rid of the demon, but nothing was taking. Eventually, it took in 1986 when a group of exorcists came to the house, and all took turns exorcising the house, and a priest even moved to the area, moved to the neighborhood just to keep an eye on things, make sure no demons were starting nothing. Well, my ghouls and goblins, that's all she wrote. Until next time, I'll see you back in the fog, and keep on creeping on.